Smile, be chat, join for networking.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Rene from Vision B2B Marketing Training, and I help business owners and businesses and companies and brands market with intent. But I'm not going to talk about that today, really. I'm going to talk about how you as a business owner, you as a person in your life can position yourself on expertise, on the expertise that you have from the experiences that have maybe formed you to the person that you are now, the views that you have, the beliefs that you have, the way you go about living your life. So I'm going to take you through 5 tips, I suppose, on how to position yourself and your expertise. And some of them are coming from a period in my life of about 2005 to 2010, where I did a lot of work and spent a lot of time investing in my own personal brand that led to a number of things that opened a lot of doors and consequently to me starting my own business in 2015. So I'm going to start by offering tip number 1 on how to position yourself and your expertise, and that is about standing for something. Now, when you meet a lot of fine people, when you're out and about networking, a lot of customers and all of these wonderful people, there's a number of ways that you can stand out. There's a number of ways that you can stand for something. You have people, fabulous people who are driven by a particular mission, by a particular purpose that was probably born out of an awful event that they've managed to take the positives from that and really drive themselves forward, and they have a real crusade. So we all know a couple of people probably in this network and other networks where they are really driven by a personal mission to kind of help people and help the world around them. You can also stand out and stand for something, and it's about being, never get this right, memorable, rememberable, memorability. Whatever that is, that's what you're after. So other ways to do that is you want to be the person, the go-to person that people think of for a particular service, business, or particular sector of help or whatever it is. So to do that, you've got to make sure it's very crystal clear what you're about. Yeah, how you do that, how you deliver that. So going back into my time, this 2005, 2010. A lot of people are talking about that period as well in talks. I was working in marketing agencies, and I was working in business to business. So business to business, but particularly the really dry end of it. So I'm talking about companies that are selling valves to BP. And these valves go at the bottom of the seabed, and they pump the oil out of the seabed and get it up to the refineries. Now, the thing is with products like that, they cost a hell of a lot of money. Once somebody's buying them from one company, it's very difficult to just on a whim swap it and buy it from somebody else, because you've got all sorts of specifications and regulations and rules and all this sort of stuff in there. And you've also got real risks involved with products like that going wrong. So developed a bit of a niche for working with companies in supply chain in sectors like that. Did a lot of work with food ingredients, people supplying things like emulsifiers and the things that you see in the label on the back of the tin of soup that makes it thick and creamy and more tasty than just the natural ingredients. Quite a grubby industry, actually. So working with a lot of companies like that, so the real dry end of industrial B2B. And this was about this period, sort of the mid-2000s, where digital marketing starts to arrive, social media starts to arrive. Facebook arrived in, I think, 2004. Google was around since 1998. YouTube had arrived in about 2004-05 as well. LinkedIn was 2006. So there's all this stuff and this swirling, companies trying to make the best use of the internet, create tribes, create places to go and hang out. So digital was becoming to be quite an exciting time. And it was about 8 years into this, a lot of companies are starting to look at websites and using email for business and marketing and things like that. And I kind of thought, okay, there's an interesting thing going on here, that the sort of clients I work with are still very much in the traditional marketing space. So trade shows, putting editorial into trade magazines, a very kind of old school way of doing it, had a lot of advertising, a lot of speaking at exhibitions and events and things like that. And they weren't really embracing digital, and if they were doing it in a very staid, conservative way. They were brochureware websites that were just showing this is who we are and this is what we do and all of this sort of thing. So I started to, through writing blogs and all this sort of stuff, start to position as somebody that was working in B2B, but specifically digital, and that was quite different in that particular space, and working with clients and consulting with clients on how to take advantage of some of this stuff. So whether you're driven by a personal crusade or something that's kind of inherently skills-based or a passion that you have, when you want people to think about you in a certain way, when you're in the room or you're not in the room, or they're looking at your website or somebody's mentioned your name somewhere, people have an instant thought. There's a thought that pops into their head about you, believe it or not. when your name's mentioned, saw such and such at a meeting last week, or did you see the article they wrote, or have you seen them on Facebook again blowing things up in certain Facebook groups. We all know which ones. We all take a view. So I guess the thing is, if you want to be seen as an expert, you've got to own the story that you're putting out, wherever you put it out. So by standing for something, you start to put a bit of a framework around that and say, I want to be the go-to person on whatever topic it is or whatever subject it is, and go about that. So that's the first one. Second one is about finding community and about sort of getting involved and being an engaged, good, helpful, useful member of the communities that you want to serve. Because again, we've got to be really careful in terms of identifying and finding the sorts of people that we want to influence and we want to work with and we want to have mutual reciprocal relationships with. Because if we go into those places and we just start doing the whole buy my stuff thing, classic thing, it just switches people off. Much better to kind of engage and sort of be involved, develop those relationships, show an interest, show that you care about people. You know, we're kind of hearing that a lot in talks. So as I said, I got on to about 2008 thinking about looking at Twitter and looking at blogging. It'll be a slight sort of detour this. I do a talk called 4 Redundancies in a Startup, which is, as you can imagine, a bit of an emotional talk about how I kept getting sacked because I was rubbish at a job or I was overstretching on a particular job. And the point is that in 2008, when I was facing this up for the 3rd time, I kept getting asked to leave a job because I wasn't the right person or I was just too angsty or whatever it was. I started to think personal brand. So that was where I started a blog site called The Marketing Assassin. Sounds ridiculous, but the idea is of The Marketing Assassin, it was a kind of a play on the smiling assassin phrase that a lot of people kind of bandy about. So it's that kind of nice and smiley, but really quite steely underneath. But the thing about Marketing Assassin blog in 2008-9 was that it was an attempt to give me a platform to talk about the things that I was passionate about and to build a profile and to build a bit of a name, I suppose, in the markets that I wanted to run in. And I ran that blog, actually, ironically, up until I set up this business in 2015, when I'm sure all the business owners in the room will laugh at this. The minute you start working with other clients and running your own business, all that fun stuff you used to like doing kind of falls by the wayside. So I didn't do as much as I thought. But the interesting thing then, so Twitter was alive in 2008 and blogging was still a big, powerful force. And so when you merge the two things together, you've suddenly got, broadcast media that can enable you to put your messages and your content and your point of view and things out. So it works quite well together. But just like in the real world, in networking, we don't want to walk into a room and just talk about ourselves all the time, because then people will start to switch off. People will start to ignore you because you're that guy who just comes in and talks about yourself all the time. So what I learned and what I developed was a kind of method of building a profile through what we call curation. So, and this is great, particularly if you're a business and you don't have a lot of time to do marketing. So what you can do is you can use some very clever online tools to basically pull in information and stories and articles and things that you want to be associated with, and through the process of sharing them out and kind of having people like it and follow you for you sharing this sort of stuff, you can build an influence platform. You can build a platform of being an expert and a go-to in a particular topic, even if you're not developing any content yourself. You kind of sit like a facilitator, and people think, I don't have to go and look at all these websites and read all this stuff and follow all these email subscriptions, because I can just follow what Rene does, because I know what he's going to put out every day. He's already doing it, he's pulling it in and he's sharing it out. So he's my go-to for this particular thing. So it's quite an interesting way of building positioning. And it is also, flattery gets you everywhere. And particularly in the digital environment, you can now read a book. You can get a book by some American bigwig business writer, and you can write a tweet and say, hey, at Bill Withers or whatever. Strange name to choose, but there you go. I'm sure he's written some very good business books when he wasn't writing songs that went on for 15 minutes. But anyway, it wasn't in the script. Like a lovely day, every day. Anyway, so, but you can now at Bill with his business books and say, hey, great business book, Bill. And he'll come back and say thanks. And then you can start tweeting and no, thank you for thanking me, thank you. All this stuff works. It works on Facebook with tagging, on all of these platforms. If you bring people in and have that empathy, you can start to build relationships. I'm going to get to a point in a minute where this stuff has actually led me to make thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds by flattering people that I want to influence. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. At point 3, now this is going to be a bit controversial to the self-made people listening to this and watching this on demand. This is about having qualifications and about having accreditations. And in my game, it's quite important actually, because you can wake up tomorrow and read one blog and decide you're going to be a marketing expert. Because that's what it's like in my world. You know, you can just splat some words out there that you found online, and some people will believe it. And then all of a sudden, you know, people like me are like, hang on a minute, I did exams 20 years ago, and I do CPD every year, and I do all this stuff, and I read these books, and this little spotty kid over here is telling everybody that they're a social media expert, and they're getting loads of business as well. It's like, so it's a bit of a fickle, flaky industry from that perspective. So for me, it's about always trying to put extra things on top of the qualifications that I might have done 20 years ago. So if you're like me, you know, there's a few people here today that are of a similar age, watching at home as well. You might be a similar age. You might have done a degree 20 years ago. You might have done other little post-qualifications after that. But what have you added to your skill set, to your mix, to your positioning and your expertise in the last 3, 4, 5 years that could actually give you some serious competitive edge? So yeah, have a little think about that. And if it's not qualifications, if you're not working in a sector where qualifications are particularly relevant or matter, maybe accreditations. You know, being associated with the right sort of bodies, the right sort of organisations that, you know, imply a certain, you know, set of a standard, you know, a set of quality. Or awards. Awards are fantastic. If you can say you're award winning, people think, wow, award winning, you must be really good. I'm not going to tell you what the awards were for, but if you can be award winning, that certainly helps. So that's the third one. So that's about education, qualifications and accreditation. Fourth one, big one, this big one, I talk about this a lot. So this is about influencers. This is about finding people in your space, and your space, take that as literally as you want to find that, in your geographical space, in your market sector, in the sector that you operate in, okay? So if you can find some people who have got there a little bit faster than you, or are a couple of steps ahead of you, and you're looking at what they're doing well, and, you know, kind of going to borrow a little bit of it, and sort of, you know, I like the way they're doing that, I like the way she's doing that, I'm going to try a little bit of that for myself. Always better than just trying to reinvent it yourself and go from scratch yourself. So think as our, you know, elusive community leader Brad Burton often says, you know, the quickest way to get from A to B is to model it on somebody else that's already done it. Yeah, don't reinvent the wheel. Now for me, it was a guy I've talked about in meetings before, a guy called Dave Chaffee, who built himself the monopoly in all things digital marketing in the UK. So back in the 1990s, he had a website called davechaffee.com. It was one of the first websites, and he was writing loads of blogs and talking about Google, which had just arrived. So he was right at the forefront of all this stuff about digital marketing. He then got himself a real cushy gig writing all the exam papers for the CIM, Chartered Institute of Marketing, marking all the exam papers, writing all the textbooks. So he had a nice monopoly in the CIM for quite a long period of time. So I did some postgraduate courses in 2009-10, of which it was pretty likely that he'd have marked the exam and I got the pass. And then I found out that he was talking up at Manchester at the cricket ground, and thought I'm going to go along and see him and say hello and get on his radar. And I was working in a big marketing agency at the time. And this is the whole thing about influence. So he comes off the stage and I say, oh, Dave, can I get a minute? You know, hi, I'm Rene, I work at this agency and da-da-da-da-da. I've just done this course. I've just passed this course. I think you passed me, thank you very much. So, oh, what are you into? I'm into kind of really industrial B2B, Dave, actually. It's really painfully dull. I was working with a bed springs manufacturer, I think, at the time. So I had a particularly interesting client. I said, there is one thing, though, Dave, that really kind of, you know, in all the material, in all the textbooks and all the exam papers, all the case studies, it's all Coca-Cola and Innocent Drinks and M&S and, you know, Virgin and Sky, big brand stuff. And it's like, most people who are on your courses, most people who are sort of working in marketing are going to be working in smaller companies. They might be a department of one, or it might be small businesses looking for a bit of kind of marketing support, but they're going to be working in a business-to-business environment where they're trying to sell their wares to other businesses. And there's just nothing anywhere. And he's like, oh, okay. Why don't you put some stuff on my website? Do you want to write some blog posts to my website? And I'm like, okay, we can do that. So for the course of a year, I did a blog post on his website once a month, B2B, and it was writing about all the things that all the other guys were writing about, but from a B2B perspective, how to use video, how to use Facebook, how to get email, and all of these things. And then he turns around to me and says, okay, so I'm ramping up the expert membership. And what that means is that people are going to pay Dave an inordinate amount of money to be a member of his community, but they're going to get loads of guides and templates and stuff out of this community. And it's missing a B2B one, so do you want to write it? Yeah, I can probably write a guide on it. How big do you want it to be? And he's like, well, they're all 7 steps, about 200 pages. Is that all right? Okay, so it took a whole summer. And we put it on the site, and there's a very nice relationship there where every time somebody downloads it, I get a £5. So you think, okay, I'll probably get little bit of money out of this. 4 years later, 4 versions later, I probably made about 20 grand out of it. So it's from going up and having the balls to go and talk to somebody and say, hi, you're really quite cool, I like what you do, and I want to be a part of it. Okay. So when I said earlier about finding people and flattering them and doing all that online tickling and all that sort of stuff, if you can take it further and start to look at how you can get into mutual relationships. And I see people in this audience today, which I can't name for contractual reasons on the video, doing this sort of stuff, and it's fantastic to see how you can open doors and get into bigger businesses and all of this sort of stuff. So find people in your operating environment who you can potentially work with and give them a little tickle because it works. Okay, the 5th and final thing, again, really, metaphorically. But hey, if it works, you got to read the signs. The 5th one, they're all important, of course, but the 5th one, again, I think is really important, and I call it giving back. Experts put themselves out there. Experts give information freely. They don't put everything behind gated sign-up forms and gated email subscriptions. They write blogs. They give talks. There's constantly threads on the 4N Facebook page and group about whether people should do talks for free and things like that. You should absolutely do talks for free if it gives you the opportunity to open up doors and new markets and people in that room who are then going to come and talk to you afterwards. We know if you're talking at a conference, the chances are the minute you finish and come off the lectern, there's going to be a few people that are going to be interested in taking it further. So yeah, giving back, really, really important. I'm quite blessed that, I work into marketing managers in mid-sized companies. I work into councils. I do some training and stuff like that. I run a marketing club with some small businesses. But I also do work with universities and graduates and schools in terms of going in and talking about business and careers in marketing and things like that. And it's really important to give back. And and it's not entirely not Machiavellian, because you also know that they're all going to be employed in a few years' time, and they might be looking for services like mine. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing to do. But giving back, that's what experts do. So that's a little talk about if you want to be an expert, you want to be seen as an expert, some of the things that you should be thinking about. Thank you very much.
Smile, be chat, join for networking.